Richard Bazley is an Emmy-nominated film director with an extensive background in Hollywood animation.
I started on Pocahontas, and then I was lucky enough on Hercules to become a lead animator, and I had 3 of my own characters.
I ask him about that golden age of animation and why it ended.
What I did and always loved and wanted to do doesn't exist in Hollywood anymore. Iron Giant flopped. Amazing film, but it flopped. We had gone from getting phone calls from Jeffrey Katzenberg, offering double our salaries and all that, and then within a few years, Disney had forgotten about 2D animation.
I ask him about his transition to live action and his acclaimed short films, Censure and Confines.
You guys do your thing.
So this is my start.
This is your start?
Yeah.
We also discuss what makes a good story and whether there's a deeper meaning to all of reality. And would you consider yourself spiritual at all, or I'm just kind of intrigued?
That's interesting. I'm not a Christian, I'm not of any religious faith, but I'm certainly open to ideas and exploring what it's all about. I don't know if we'll ever know. It's almost like the Bible almost seems more believable than the science at times, it's so great.
Welcome to my conversation with Richard Bazley.
First of all, thank you for having me, because I've watched your channel, and I find it thoroughly enjoyable. They're really good, great in-depth analysis of films, far better than I can do. I think they're terrific.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Oh, it means a lot coming from you. Thanks a lot, Richard. Yeah.
No problem.
So, Richard, you're an Emmy-nominated film director.
Yes.
You have an extensive background in animation. I've just been going through your IMDb, and it's quite a lineup. I mean, you were involved in animating Hercules, a Disney film, The Iron Giant, which is one of my absolute childhood favourites. The Illusionist as well. I was a big fan of that film.
That's right. Probably the last film I properly animated on, because as you know, Hollywood animation died after Toy Story, after having an amazing run there and having the time of my life. Being at Disney, it was almost like being at art school and university again, because we would have classes, we would have lectures on acting, improv, lectures on storytelling. Chris Vogler, who wrote Hero's Journey, would come in. The best life drawing tutors you can imagine, Steve Houston, a whole host of others, free at lunchtime. So it was a golden age. It's not like it now, but it was a golden age to be there in the 10-year slot that roughly I was there. And obviously, I started on Pocahontas, and then I was lucky enough on Hercules to become a lead animator, and I had 3 of my own characters, Amphitryon, Alcmene, and Demetrius. And I'll tell you a quick story, because I'm very proud of it. I was involved in, Gerald Scarfe was involved in design, but we kind of designed our own characters and he tweaked them to his style. And Amphitryon, my parents came over to visit Disney, and he looked at some drawings on the wall, and he said, "My goodness, that's me." And I said, "You're right, because as an artist, you naturally draw things that come from your own life experiences. And as a boy, I drew them all the time. And I didn't draw my mum because she didn't want me drawing her with a big nose. so well, she has one, but you can caricature your dad with no offense. So and that obviously fed through to the character. So he's passed away now, but I've immortalized him in a Disney film. That's him.
That is very cool. You obviously have this incredible background in doing animation.
Yeah.
And then you've kind of stepped into doing some live action short films. What motivated that decision, and have you found a lot of overlap between them?
A few reasons. A big reason is that what I did and always loved and wanted to do doesn't exist in Hollywood anymore. As I say, when Toy Story came out, it was a bit after The Iron Giant, I think, or around the same time. Iron Giant flopped. Amazing film, but it flopped. And we had gone from getting phone calls from Jeffrey Katzenberg, offering double our salaries and all that. And then within a few years, Disney had forgotten about 2D animation. So a number of artists sort of reinvented themselves. I had to. The cleanup artists moved into different fields. Some animators went into storyboarding. Some went into CGI. I went into CGI for a little bit, for a while, but it never floated my boat the same way because you have so many artists involved in the process before it gets on the screen. Whereas an animator, your drawings, you have a cleanup artist, but it's pretty close to what you do that's on the screen. So I felt very removed with CGI. It was very different to Disney, where I they gave you ownership of the characters. John Musker and Ron Clements would give you a lot of freedom. And in fact, I used some live action reference, not for Demetrius, but for the Earth parents. And they did maybe 20 minutes for the audition, but then they left and said, right, up to you. And they left. So I got experience of directing the live action auditions for the performances that we could use as reference. So that was a great hands-on experience. And what's interesting is that the number of animators that have come, famous directors that have come from an animation background. So as you know, I worked with Brad Bird on The Iron Giant, and he went on to do Mission Impossible and Tomorrowland. Tim Burton was a Disney animator. He used to sleep under his desk during Fox and the Hound because he got depressed drawing cute foxes. Disney didn't know what to do with him.
Right.
So he had at that time Nightmare Before Christmas. They weren't interested. It was too dark for them. So he had to leave, and he became a huge name. And then later on, I think they hired him to do Nightmare Before Christmas. And there's others. So there's a lot of translatable skills. So I was able to observe this and watch this. And as 2D animation was kind of collapsing, and back in England, there isn't the demand. I directed a couple commercials, one for Sky, and dare I say, a Go Compare commercial.
Oh, amazing. They're pretty iconic.
You can leave that in for fun. And they were good money, but it's not enough. It's after doing big Disney films, it's not satisfying. And there was the other thing. I moved back to England for family reasons. My parents were older. My wife wanted to come back. And so I went back and forth for 20 years I did direct Lost Treasure Hunt, which was done through a producer at Sony, Matt Davis, who created the show. It's a long story, but it landed on my lap when I was storyboarding it, and we needed to take it somewhere, so we took it to GoSpot in San Francisco. So it was this small indie project, and we ended up getting 2 Emmy nominations for it. So I was delighted for that. So I'm storyboarding it and working it out, and what's interesting is all the storyboarding skills translate to live action. But in animation, you actually storyboard things much, much more than you do in live action. It's more because especially with TV stuff, not so much at Disney, but with TV stuff, when I was working at Rough Draft, they have a studio in Korea, and they also do Futurama and Simpsons over there. So we did a show, and I directed 2 episodes. So you have to do these extensive boards, which you send away, so you don't even meet the animators. They're abroad in another country. Whereas at Disney, the storyboard artists, the directors, everyone's in the same spot, so it's easier. But that's done for TV because it's more economical. But I could still use those stories, all those storytelling skills that I got from boarding, the classes I had at Disney, plus what people don't realize, they say animator, they think you just draw. Drawing's only part of it. You're a performer. I was an actor, but with a pencil. So the great thing was, I remember doing some acting at school, and I was dreadful. And I remember doing Shakespeare. We went around the room, and some of the girls were fantastic, and I would mumble these words. But I found as an animator, I could be anyone, and I was free to be any character. So that was very liberating. But I could still use those skills, which I've now been able to apply in my own films, Censure and Confines. So there is a video online where I talk about some of the ideas and influences in animation, and one of them is called business. In animation, they do a lot more personality stuff. You take a basic story, but the storyboard artist will expand much more than the script than they do in live action. So they create business and performances, which is what they did on Jungle Book, when you have a dance sequence, with Baloo the bear, when he's singing Bare Necessities. There's whole little scenarios that wouldn't be scripted, where the board artist would say, oh, look, he's being a bit careless, he lifts a rock, and he's getting ants out, and then Mowgli crawls under the rock, he drops the rock, and he just gets out in time. So it's all boarding and timing. All that stuff I learned, and I could bring into my own films. So I talk to my actors quite often beforehand, because I like to brief them heavily beforehand and try and give them as much freedom as possible on the shoot. I talked to Tom Conti, who's also in Censure, as a voice of the father. I said, Richard, give actors freedom. And what I found as an animator was when I went from Don Bluth Studios to Disney, at Disney, John Musker and Ron Clements suddenly gave me a lot more freedom than I was used to. So I had some ownership of the characters. And it creates a real believability and a passion, So if you're on a shoot, you can ask an actor to do certain things or block it out. But I never want to tell them exactly, you must do this, you must do that. I will entice or encourage or suggest. And that's my preference. So I think it gets a better performance than really hammering down on them. So you'll notice in Confines, by the way, Neil Basson is a long-term collaborator, screenwriter who wrote both scripts. So without his input, we couldn't have made these films. So I'm giving a shout out to Neil. He's a fabulous writer. So what we did on Confines, though, it was a monologue. So I had to add all these other things of interest, because otherwise it's just a guy trapped in this room. So I added different visuals. The skull is loss. The bird is guilt. And there was also a little bit of exposition. I don't like heavy exposition because the Hollywood films have to do a bit more heavy exposition because they, I dare say, appeal to a lower common denominator in the audience. They have to spread the net wider. So I briefed the actors, and I've got to do it in a way that I don't give away the story. But I talked to Luc F. Desjardins, who's the star of that film, and Vivian Taylor, who was in both films. And I set the scenario about, so I don't want to give away a story, but I just described what was going on and the situation, and I let them improvise the scene, and we filmed it, and we put it in the film. We weren't sure if we were going to at the time, but it worked superbly. So is that sort of those lessons I learned working with actors, improv, so all those skills I've been managed to bring over into my own filmmaking.
Yeah, I'd love to talk in more detail about Censure and Confines. Should we start with Censure?
Yes.
Because one thing that struck me about that was its length is interesting. It's about 40 minutes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is kind of almost between short film and feature length. And I was kind of intrigued by that because I've actually made a 40-minute film as well. It's kind of TV episode length, I guess. So what was the thinking behind that?
I'll tell you about that. Because to me, it's all about the idea. Like David, it's all about the idea. And there are so many rules out there from execs. You must do this, you must do that. But I like the idea to drive the creativity and what we do with it. So I talked to, originally we were going to do a 10-minute, 20-minute short. And Neil wrote the script. And it was 20 minutes. So okay. Because most festivals like their shorts under 20 minutes to get them in. But the thing is, I added a lot of other things. There's a dance sequence with On Top of the World, again with A.D. Chivers, and O'Connor, by the way, which I'll talk about in a minute, did an amazing job. And it was just, it felt as I read the script that we needed to expand it visually. So I added other visual elements and other atmospheric ideas. And normally, if you've got a TV series, it's normally you get a page per minute on screen, normally, because you've just got talking heads and that's it, normally. But with a film, we had a dance sequence and other elements to embellish. And when we shot the film, Joe, my DOP afterwards was laughing. He said, we've got probably about 60 to 80 minutes of footage. So it actually wasn't quite enough for a feature. So I'm like, well, let's just cut it to what feels right. So we cut it. I said, well, let's try and get it under 40 because that is the break-off point for shorts. So we got it to just under 39 minutes. And, I undenied, and I did have a festival, a film festival sort of specialist say, or doctor, they call them, can you cut this down? And I looked at it and I said, no. This is what it needs to be. But my next film, I'll make sure we do a 20-minute one. But this one, I'm not hacking it up. So I put it out there and I thought, maybe we've blown it with some festivals, but we got it. It's won over 40 awards, Censure, so far. And, it's picked up awards in New York, LA, and over in Cannes at one of the festivals there. In fact, we went over with AD and Daniel Penny of Noise in Your Eye, and we picked up best score at the Cannes 7th Arts Awards. It was also screened in Beverly Hills as part of the Venice Shorts Festival, which we won. I'd have to check which one was best director, I think, best film, best indie short. And they said, "Oh, do you have a shorter version?" I said, "No, I don't." So they said, "Okay," because all the films they were showing, they only had a 2-hour slot, and we were taking up 40 minutes of that, and the rest of them were 10 minutes. So it's amazing they did that, and they played ours as the final film of the evening. And again, there's an online interview with a lot of my friends on there, and I was just delighted that I managed to get some of my friends to go along to see it. And it's Hannah Fletcher does the interview. She has a great YouTube channel as well and does a lot of interviews, but she's based over there in LA.
Right. Yeah, and it's a very interesting concept because to me, you maybe wouldn't call it a horror film, but given the films I tend to talk about on this channel, it kind of made my ears prick up in a way, some of the themes in it, because it almost feels slasher adjacent in some ways. The idea of I don't want to spoil anything, but
no, I was thinking about this. Because originally we did have a darker ending, I'll put it like that, which fits what you just said. But for a number of reasons, I said to the writer Neil, let's keep it psychological. Let's keep it more Hitchcock and implied, hence the ending. So it's still, I actually find a lot of horror films, the ones that scare me most are the ones that toy with me and play with me before I see any of that horror or gore. I find it more psychological, disturbing things far more scary than seeing bloodshed and all of that stuff.
Totally.
But it's definitely on the cusp there, and a dark film. And I think Connor handled the character superbly. One of my briefs to him beforehand, because I wanted the audience to empathize. I mean, he doesn't, okay, we can say, spoiler alert, he doesn't do a good thing, but we empathize with him because of the lambasting that he gets from his stepfamily. Thrown in there on top of that he has a speech impediment with his stutter. So we studied, I said, study Gareth Gates and how, he had such a severe stutter, but when he sang, it just disappeared. It left. Now we have something similar again, spoiler alert. He has this bad stutter, and the more agitated he gets, the more he can't get the words out.
He's probably still got a sore throat from screaming at me earlier.
Dad, is nothing. Just...
He was screaming at me, Mr. Walker.
But in that moment, in that sequence that you see, where he's relaxing himself and does the most phenomenal delivery on a speech, it's so cool. He relaxes and he can speak fluently.
Do something creative and practical. Creative and practical. I think I managed that.
So all of that stuff was discussed and worked out beforehand.
Something interesting, and again, this is probably a slight spoiler, so we can cut it if you think it's too much of a spoiler. But this sense of, I'm reading a book at the moment called Men, Women and Chainsaws: Gender in the Modern Horror Film, which is which gave us the term final girl, which is often used of films like Halloween and Alien, where often it's a young lady who survives to the end and kind of overcomes the monster or the killer. Yeah. But this sense that often, she mentions in the book, that often the killer or the person who does the bad thing in a slasher film or a lot of horror films is confused about their gender identity in some way, whether they're cross-dressing or that kind of thing. Psycho. And you see it in Psycho, with Norman Bates, and also Silence of the Lambs with Buffalo Bill. Yeah. So I was wondering, you kind of play with that a bit in the film, and I'm obviously not raising this to demonize people who struggle with gender identity, but it is an interesting kind of outworking of this kind of agent of chaos in the story is unsure of who they are. I was wondering if you had how conscious that was.
Well, originally, it wasn't that, what you said, a gender identity. and we had other things, but we needed something that his father was uncomfortable with and to cause that conflict. So we decided to go that route. And I think it worked because it is empathetic. It's not it's empathetic with that, and I've got friends who are like that. So it's nothing. It's in films we should be able to touch upon all conditions, all things, and not demonize them. But we should be able to play with all types of characters. So that's the route we went.
Yeah, and Tom Conti, as you said, does a great job doing the dad's voice.
So we should finally have them signing the contract by the end of the week. We'll see, eh? We've been here before.
So I know him from Paddington 2, and he's Einstein in Oppenheimer, isn't he?
Well, he did that just after our film.
I
think he got paid a little bit more than we got to those few minutes. Now I'll tell you right now, Tom did that as a favor for me. I wanted him in a film years ago, and I'll tell you what it is, called Icy Spiders. It's another feature project I've had in development for years. It was optioned by some Hollywood producers, and it was going the wrong direction, but thank God I've got that film back. But one of the things was I wanted Tom Conti as the star, but that film didn't happen. It still might one day, but I knew Tom Conti through that film, and I said to him one day, I said, "Look, I said I've had several projects just fall through and not happen, and I said I've just got to get out there. I've got a friend, John E. Fry, who's a partner now with me on these films, and he's a fantastic DOP. Did all the photography in Censure and Confines, and he's fantastic. I said, we've just got to get out and make a film. But this first film, Confines, we had some money. Censure, we didn't have any money. So I said, we've got no money, but it would just be your voice. He said, Richard, it would just take me 20 minutes. So he recorded it and sent it over. And I'm forever grateful to him. And one of the ways that the film came about was actually out of lockdown, because I came up with an idea that would be economical, with one actor on screen, all the voices off screen. And I talked to Neil about it. How are we going to do this? And, so this way we could just go out and make a film during lockdown and not worry about all the conditions that were put on filmmakers at the time. Now we came out of lockdown, and I said to Neil, the writer, I said, well, look, this is still a cool idea. Let's develop it. And then when I told him that Tom would come on and do a voice, that was the incentive for him to finish it. So he finished the script, and we literally went out and made it in a few days. And best thing I ever did. It was a wonderful experience. Unlike an animated film, if I did an animated short years ago, that took me a year, called The Journal of Edwin Carp, and Hugh Laurie did the voice. But I took too many shortcuts on that because it was animation. I did it in a year. In animation, and I just did it myself mainly, animation takes so long to craft and do it well. I should have taken years and years, but not as long. Richard Williams, who's the animation director on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, took 25 years to make The Thief and the Cobbler. 25 years. He spent all his money, he did commercials, all his money making this film. And then Warner Brothers came along and said, we'll give you $3 million to finish it by this date. And he took the $3 million and he went over the date, and they took the film off him and edited it their way and destroyed it, really. Anyway, that's a side story. But so the other joy with live action is how much quicker you can get a result. I can imagine. Is that a bit refreshing for you now to be kind of working in that space? Yeah. It's like, we could actually turn projects around a bit faster. We can turn them around. So we don't need a team of 100 people working 5 years. It's I love animation, but it's you need lots of money. So the live action, if I've got an actor on a shoot, I can just stop and say, let's try it again this way or this. If you're with an animator, they do rough blocking of a scene, but if it's not right, they've got to go away and re-rough it out, take another day. It could be several days to rework it, depending on the complexity. And in fact, when I was on Harry Potter, somebody sat next to me, I mean, it had to go through such a pipeline. It was a long, long scene, and it would keep. It didn't take them this long themselves, but it had to go away, come back, go away, come back to complete that shot. I think it took 6 months and was 100,000 for one shot.
Oh wow! And what was that shot? What happened in that shot? Just out of interest.
I'm trying to recall. It's a long time ago. I think it's the hippogriff running along behind some arches. I'm wondering if it's the arches composited, I may be wrong, in Laycock. I don't know. But it was so long ago. I was so focused on my own stuff then. But I much prefer making my own films and being in control, whereas on Harry Potter, I was a cog in a machine, and probably one of the few grey-haired cogs with tons of computers at frame store all lined up. I never even met the director. And he's a great director, so just to get the chance to make my own films. And I've been lucky to work with some great directors, the ones at Disney, Ron and John, and Brad Bird. So I've worked with some great directors and met some old veterans who are fabulous. There was a guy called Victor Habouche who designed the Thorn Forest in Sleeping Beauty. And he came out of retirement on Iron Giant to do art and visual development, because Brad Bird knew him. And I got to know him, and he had left after Sleeping Beauty came out. It cost $3 million, I think, and it bombed. So they laid off 60% or more of the staff. So he was laid off with a lot of the others. And he went off into live action, but doing commercials. So he had his own live action studio making commercials. He made a lot of money doing it. And I think his claim to fame was Kibble and Bits, which was a dog food or something, and a McDonald's advert. But he never made his own live action feature, which is a shame. But I was able to pick his brains a lot. And I used to go down to his place down in Santa Monica. He had a penthouse suite at the top down there, and he had the whole top floor with a massive studio, and he was spending his later days just painting. And I've got some prints of his in my house now. So a lot of those guys that I met at Disney were fabulous artists in their own right, lots of them. So all those people that I met and picked their brains, he helped me with some storyboard ideas, and you just pick their brains. Irreplaceable. It's amazing time.
Yeah, so much of it is about networking, I guess, isn't it? And just meeting people, sharing ideas, and hugely networking. I was lucky enough to be in LA for 7 years and then going back and forth. So I've got some very dear friends who are big producers. Howard Kazanjian, who produced Raiders of the Lost Ark, Return of the Jedi, is a dear friend. Mario Kazar, who produced the first Rambo, First Blood, Terminator. In fact, I don't know if you can see behind, I've got a DVD signed there of First Blood to Richard. Love and friendship forever, your friend Mario Kazar. Oh, wow.
How cool is that?
That's very
I'm
cool.
a fanboy too, as well as making films, I'm a fan,
Yeah. And to move on to Confines, which we talked about a bit already, but this is you did get this one under 20 minutes.
We did,
But I was very struck by, as you say, the kind of most of it playing out in this cell, but cutting away to these very expansive scenes. The maze in particular really stayed with me. But interesting that two of the characters in this guy's life who are very close to him are called Faith and Hope, which is kind of interesting. It gets me thinking about 1 Corinthians 13, faith, hope, and love. The greatest of these is love. I don't know if that was a conscious reference at all, but what were you kind of trying to do with that film, would you say?
I mean, Neil came up with a lot of cool, the writer, a lot of the great ideas, Neil Basson. And I was, and Luc, the main actor, Luc Desjang, came up with the funds to make the film, and he's the star in the film. And there were limited funds, so I said, well, we're going to have to do this kind of cheaply, but let's make it look more expensive. I said, how about, I had this idea about being trapped in your own head and not being able to get out, something I related to. There's this blind house, literally just 50 yards up from my house, where they used to lock the drunks and troublemakers in for the night. And I think it's before there were police. They would lock them in there if they're drunk for the night. And I often popped in there and looked, and there's this grill at the back with this light shining through. And I pictured this guy sitting on the bench in there with the light streaming through, going through this sort of cathartic exercise and exercising his demons because he's beating himself up again and again and again. And Neil, I briefed him, wrote the most incredible script that's almost Shakespearean, which is why I'm very much a visual director towards Ridley Scott rather than Mike Leigh or Ken Loach, who I love. I love all that stuff. But probably because of my animation background, I'm very visual. So Neil can write stuff, the wording that I couldn't write. It's so well written.
I searched for the same wonder that seemed to infuse every child around me. But my thoughts were forever tinged with a darkness that bled in from the edges. I spent my days in the confines of my own mind. My self-made prison.
Well, Bill, don't you think?
I travelled from child to man, carrying the weight of my heavy companion as a constant.
And I knew Luke would deliver on the performance on that. So we went up there and filmed it, and we did have the cliff sequence in the script. And I was thinking, holy moly, how are we going to film that? I was thinking of Dover. How are we going to film them up on the cliffs there? And then Cheddar Gorge popped into my mind. And I thought, oh my God, it's an idea. They've got cliffs, they've got all sorts. So obviously when you see him, an upshot of the cliff, it's actually an outcrop that's big, but it's not a cliff, so it's not dangerous. And, you know, we shoot from behind on the cliff. There is a fun making of video where we I discuss walking up because they all got there before me. It's a long walk up. But anyway, I got there and we filmed it, and they were back from the edge enough by using the camera to make it look like they were near the edge. But I still felt comfortable standing a lot further back and directing from afar. So we had all these elements. So then I added some other elements. The skull for loss, the crow for guilt. These are sort of visual metaphors. And there was something else I wanted to add, a bit more visual stuff, so that we're just not in there all the time. So I'd seen a documentary called Stutz with Jonah Hill, where he talks to his therapist, who's called Stutz, and he interviews his therapist. It's the other way around. And it was interesting because this therapist has Parkinson's, and he does these little wobbly drawings, and they're little diagrams to give to the actor to help him get through his issues. And one of them was he drew this little maze. And he said, this is the thing, we all get stuck in this maze and we go round and round. And he drew a line right past. And he said, you have to just go past. And it's a very simple diagram, but it works. If you remind yourself, you just got to move on with these little visual ideas. So when I saw that, I called Neil and said, let's add a maze. Let's add a maze to it. And I said, so I briefed him, the actor. I said, look, when you rush up to the wall, just hold it there, and then we're going to match cut you to a maze, which we shot in called the Amazing Hedge Puzzle in Ross-on-Wye, about an hour and a half from here. So in that, he rushes up to the hedge, and we just quickly cross dissolve to his new position, and it looks like he's suddenly in the hedge, and he rushes up around the maze. Well, you've gone to the wall in the blind house. You've gone like this, you're pushing it, and we just suddenly will cut back, and you will see that it's a hedge.
I got you.
So then you've got to dash off and around and do I'll let you and John, you guys do your thing.
So this is my starts.
This is your start.
Yeah.
And looking towards camera, and we'll have in the blind house looking towards
camera right.
So camera's up and bang into the wall.
And what's fun was I briefed them and we stepped through it, and then I went up to a viewing platform up above and directed from up there. And at the end of it, he collapses and screams his head off. And it sounds like somebody's being murdered. And so a dog walker had walked past and looked in and said, what on earth is going on here? And it was a very funny situation. That would have been a nice behind the scenes take just to have got that dog walk out. I think it freaked the dog out. But you'll see it in the scene. He collapses. He's gone through this breakdown, and then I won't give any more away of the story there. But it's a very powerful piece, and again, on limited means, but bigger budget doesn't always mean better or more money. Which is interesting because I was just going to mention your review of Mickey 17, which I thought was really interesting, with the Korean director, because I love Parasite, and I loved Snowpiercer. I enjoyed Mickey 17, but it didn't do it for me in the same way the other films. And I thought, well, it just shows you more money doesn't mean better.
Yes.
So
I think I agree with you on that, actually. It doesn't doesn't quite have the punch of his previous films, does it?
No, and you look at Guillermo del Toro with his Pan's Labyrinth and his beautiful independent films or smaller films, and then when he did Pacific Rim with more money, I thought, no. But the problem is you get more voices and more people, and one of the things is I'm having the time of my life on Censure and Confines, even though there's hardly any money. Because if we do get one of the bigger films going, there will be more voices to accommodate if somebody's putting money in and this, that. So you have to play the politics and work through it. Obviously, the bigger you get, like Ridley Scott, the more you can call the shots. Whereas it'll be interesting to see what happened to the director of The Joker, which was a fabulous film. He was given so much freedom on Joker 2 with the musical that flopped, I guess. Whether he'll get that again, but he got that moment of freedom there to do what he wanted. But that's what it's about, filmmaking. Telling your story, your way. At Disney, the only directors that really got their own identity were John Musker and Ron Clements, who were there during Basil of Baker Street, Little Mermaid, Hercules, Aladdin. They had an identity, but most of the other directors at Disney on the other films didn't really have their own identity because they're working with executives. They do one film and that's it. So if I'd wanted to direct at Disney, I would have to switch to the story department and been there for years, and they would have like 100 people waiting, lining up to direct. Far better to do it this way. Small steps,
And when you're deciding like a story, what are you looking for in a story when you're like, I want to make that into a film? Like, what is it that kind of, maybe it's hard to pin down in a way, but what is it that you look for in a good story?
An idea that excites me, that I want to make. I mean, Censure and Confines obviously both deal with mental health issues for men, so maybe I relate to that. So there's a lot of things in there. So. Ideas. I love. I love David Lynch films. I don't understand them all.
Me neither.
Well, I'd love to. After this, I'll pick your brains because I want to try. I think you could figure them out better than me, actually. So I love Mulholland Drive. I kind of twigged it afterwards, but Inland Empire, I still can't get my head around. But I love him as a director because he's free and he would do it his way, and he has an identity. Same with Sean Baker, who just did Honora. I actually thoroughly enjoyed Honora. And I loved, was it the film Tangerine that he did on Santa Monica Boulevard? That small independent film.
Florida Project as well.
Sorry?
Florida Project as well. Was that Sean
Florida
Baker,
Project.
I think? Yeah.
So I think he's fabulous because in his speech he talked about independent filmmaking, although he did get $6 million to do Honora, I think, and they spent $18 million on advertising, and that worked.
Okay. Yes.
But he talked about how the pressure from execs to use big names. As you probably saw, I also teamed up with Gary Kurtz, the producer of Crystal, Star Wars, and we were partners in GBK Hybrid for years and still have a project out there. But he would tell me, and he said on the first Star Wars, they weren't big names, the people at the time. Harrison Ford wasn't known. So he was one of the old wise producers. I was able to pick his brains again, So sadly, he passed away a few years ago. So, but he was a dear friend and a mentor. Censure and Confines, I see as baby steps towards a goal because I've got some other bigger projects in the works. The next one I want to do is called Bambola. That would star Vivian Taylor, who's a fantastic Glaswegian actress. And in the other films, she had small parts, but this one, she is the star. And she is, because I know how good she will be, because I've worked with her. And it's a fabulous script. It's sort of more back in the realms of Censure. It's about with a female lead. There's a lot of interesting artwork that I've been doing, and I'm talking to a number of producers. And I'm hoping it started as a short, but the script came in at 30 pages, and I said to Neil, "Well, looking at what happened to Censure, this would end up being a 60-minute film, and then it falls well between a short and a feature. So let's just go for it. Let's go for a feature. So hopefully we can get it over an 80-minute film as a feature. It will still be micro budget, but I've got a producer not that far away that's interested in putting in money. And I can't say the name of the American producer, but a big name that's interested, but we'll see where that goes. But it's called Bambola. There's a Facebook page, and it'd be the same team, and we can do it on a very limited budget, but really make it a stunning film. So that's the next one for me. And then there's other big ones afterwards. The Chimeran, which was developed with Gary Kurtz, which is a cross between Planet of the Apes and District 9. And that's been out there a long time. So those things take a long time, if they happen at all. So whilst that's out there and we're pushing and trying, sadly Gary's not out there to push it anymore, but I've got another producer on that. So it's all steps. But having said that, if they don't happen for a while, I'm still happy to make another short film for the hell of it, because I love it.
Yeah, for the love of the craft. No, that's really encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, just out of interest, and you don't have to answer it, but you probably know on my channel I'm often talking about films through a kind of theological lens. And would you consider yourself spiritual at all, or I'm just kind of intrigued?
That's interesting. Tradition in the past, I haven't been. I'm intrigued with David Lynch, although I guess it's spiritual in a way. In that I was looking at his transcendental meditation that he was big into. And I've tried. I haven't been able to crack it yet or do it. I'm fascinated by a lot of the programs about astrology and you look at it all and you think, how incredible is that? How can this just be random? But I'm not a Christian. I'm not of any religious faith. But I'm certainly open to ideas and exploring what it's all about. I don't know if we'll ever know. We're all sort of guessing and trying to find answers. And science, there's so much it cannot answer. And the funny thing is, some of the science where they talk about a singularity and how it started off barely visible, and from that singularity, within seconds, you had the Big Bang, or they call it something else before the Big Bang happens. How is that possible? It's almost like the Bible. The day was created, the world was created in so many days, and then there's their rest. Almost seems more believable than the science at times. It's so crazy. But no, are you particularly spiritual then? In
Yeah, well, it's funny. I probably wouldn't naturally be drawn to that sort of thing. But for me, I just find the person of Jesus specifically incredibly compelling.
It is.
The fact that he's this kind of, he claims to be God, and yet he's nailed to a piece of wood and is kind of bleeding and praying for his enemies, and that's the means by which he saves the world. And I think so many of the stories that resonate with me are kind of doing that death and resurrection shape, the kind of the hero who...
How do the slasher movies fit into that?
That's a very good question, actually. Yeah, well, going back to the thing you were talking about so you do your film Censure from the perspective of the guy who's kind of holding the knife in a way, which is certainly interesting psychologically. And when you look at the cross, you have this Roman centurion driving a spear into Jesus, and I think a Roman would look at that image and identify with the centurion, the ones holding the power, and they would look at the person on the cross and say, that's a criminal, that's a person who needs to be killed by the state. Whereas now we look at that image and we identify the victim, the one on the cross, as the one who is sacred because of the impact that Christianity has had. And I think now a lot of the time slashers actually tell the story from the victim's perspective, and they want us to identify with, they want us to fear what the victim is fearing. So it's definitely controversial for a Christian to be into horror films.
What's interesting is obviously the things that we all find abhorrent, Nazism, all that. But what's interesting is American History X. I remember watching American History X, and there's this right-wing, vile human being, and he does something that's so appalling in it. But what's incredible is that the director, by the end of the film, gets you to empathize with this guy. So that's a sign of an amazing director, amazing filmmaker, that they put you in the head of these, or even the Joker. Like what he does is horrible at the end, but you're kind of like in his head thinking, well, I get it. And it's kind of scary that those filmmakers can make you feel like that. They take you on that journey,
Yeah, and I think there's a kind of double thing going on when you're watching something like Joker, because on the one hand, you're repulsed by what he's doing, but maybe an even more uncomfortable aspect of it, especially when it's told in his shoes a little bit, is you kind of identify a slight sense of that darkness within yourself.
That's right.
And it's confronting, isn't it?
Well, this is what maybe the thing is in our head, as a baby, when you grow up, all these facets of the human being are capable of going in different directions depending on your life experiences. Some of these villains, were they abused? What happened to them? Were they treated so badly that so maybe people have all these things directions they could have gone in, but we all aim towards good. But there's still those elements that think, oh my God, the wrong choices could have gone the other way. And you see people that turn their lives around. Boxers find their sport, and suddenly they stop crime and they find a way forward. So I suppose going back to stories are a great way of finding a meaning to life. When an audience sits in a theatre, we're trying to make sense of all this noise and stuff going on, and films are a way of taking us down different journeys and making us think about things. And those are the kind of films. I mean, once in a while, I enjoy just a romp or an action adventure film, but I do enjoy the films that make you think afterwards or make you move. And one, I wish I could remember the director's name. You'll know him. The film that just came out, The Girl with the Needle.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh my God. Absolutely incredible. Black and white film. It's grim but beautiful, if that makes sense. And you're taking on this journey with this girl where a lot of things go wrong with her life again and again. And it's just, I don't know how many awards. I would have given that more awards than Nora. And I think it's a Danish director, and it's in Danish, and it's Danish, Polish, and Swedish backed. Just a phenomenal film, and I watch a film like that, I think, yes, that's, and it's subtitles, so I always find subtitles films take me a little bit longer to get into because but once you get into the film, you don't mind reading it, the subtitles. Thoroughly fantastic film.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'll have to check that out, actually. I haven't seen
you
that.
like it's very dark. Very dark.
Yeah, and I think that's what I appreciate about horror, but also, other genres of film that deal with the darkness in the world. I should say there are definitely films I wouldn't want to watch. There's definitely ways you can kind of engage with these themes in ways that are exploitative or unhelpful.
Horror films like Hostel, I struggle a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the kind of torture core.
There's a few of those,
strand.
and you think, and the studios seem to jump on those. They seem to get a guaranteed audience. But again, I prefer, whereas Guillermo del Toro will do a horror in a beautiful way, with a beautiful storytelling,
Yeah, and I think horror at its best is kind of naming the kind of reality of darkness in the world, and it's confronting, and sometimes horror films even offer the kind of possibility of deliverance, that maybe somehow the monster can be overcome. And what I really love about what you do in Confines is there is that kind of light at the end, isn't there? You plumb the deep depths, but then there's a sense of hope.
There's literally a light at the end of the tunnel on that one. Censure is darker, and Confines has, it's dark, but there's something there, and I leave it implied. I won't give away the ending, but I leave what happens after implied, which I tend to prefer. One of my favorite directors is Ridley Scott. I know some people criticize him because of story, but when he gets it right, it's just beautiful. And the original Gladiator, not the new one, there's a scene in there, and they were struggling with the story. And there's a scene where Joaquin Phoenix's character, you can see him, he wants to be loved by his father, and his father doesn't love him, and he's behind the Russell Crowe character. That's his favorite, and he's desperate for love. And he's desperate for it, and he does all these things to try and get his attention. And what he does in the end, he grabs him and he hugs him, but he hugs him to death and suffocates him. He hugs him and hugs him. And I thought, what an incredible piece of storytelling by the writer who added that. I thought it was stunning filmmaking. Now, going back to animation, my animation background, because I've done animation and worked in CGI, I can spot good CGI and bad CGI. And CGI can be done at hundreds of studios around the world and thrown in. And depends on so many things. So I was a bit disappointed in the new Gladiator. There's a sequence where these baboons attack the leading character. And it became more like an X-Men movie with all it didn't look great. They spent a lot of money on it. They didn't look believable, the baboons. They were rendered, but it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. So sometimes, if it's possible, I actually prefer visual effects that are done on the spot, physical special effects, as opposed to CGI. There's lots of places to use good CGI, but I saw a scene once, and it sounds awful, but it was a crocodile underwater with a man fighting, and you saw it on screen. So, wow, that's incredible. But it was actually a puppet with a man with a hand up on a prosthetic puppet struggling. But because of the way it was shot and it was fast and lots of bubbles, it looked real. Whereas if it had been CGI, they would have probably shown more of it, and you'd think, oh, that doesn't feel real. And it's interesting that Ridley Scott talks about in Napoleon how they used more physical effects and explosions rather than CGI because he felt it felt more real, which is why I was a bit confused as to why he did the baboons that way. I don't know if there's any other way around it, because if you had real baboons, you can't control them. So it's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one. And what is amazing is Alien was a man in a suit. And that could have looked awful. It could have looked like, the Godzilla movies, which are fun, but it's a man in a suit. But you never watch the original and think, oh, that's a man in a suit, because of the photography and the way he shot it, and he didn't give too much away or shoot full figure that much. So you'd see just the head and the mouth, you'd see different shadows, all those things. If they're implied, they're often better than if you show it. And same happened in Jaws. The mechanical shark broke down during the shoot, so they hardly used any of the footage. It was a blessing in disguise because you had loads of points of view of the shark underwater with that amazing piece of music. Da da da. Far better than showing the shark, to imply it. It's much better. And Hitchcock understood that. He would always imply things. And it's something that happens with a lot of modern films, is they chuck the kitchen sink in at you in the first few minutes, and you see all these CGIs, all these vampires flying around in the first minute, and you kind of like blown the excitement of building up to that,
Yeah. Less is more a lot of the time.
Less is more.
Yeah.
Less is more. That's it.
Well, Richard, this has been an absolute masterclass. You've been very generous with your time.
Oh, no. I've really enjoyed chatting to you, and I hope we can again, and about other films, when we make them.